happy to be here and excited to kind of walk you through a little bit of our view of the world and how we tried to solve some of the kind of growing problems that we see. When we look at, just the kind of general lens of where HashiCorp kind of fits in, we really start to talk about how we're aimed at enabling the world's largest companies and developers to deliver applications faster by helping them transition from kind of manual processes into this kind of world of modern automation. We have several open source projects and enterprise products that we offer. Vagrant, Packer, Terraform, Vault, Boundary, Consul, Nomad, and Waypoint, just to kind of list them off. We're going to talk about three of these kind of more specifically today. We've also presented at prior Cloud Field Days, so feel free to go check out those sessions to learn more about the company and other products. But today we're going to focus around Zero Trust security in our products, Vault, Consul, and Boundary. And so you've heard of the term Zero Trust, but what does it mean? And we're going to kind of look at that, and especially kind of in the realm of kind of full security and how that kind of plays out. And when we start to talk about it, we kind of look from the lens that like securing a data center used to be really easy, right? You could control all of the traffic and access into these kind of four walls through kind of like that castle and moat approach. So you're really kind of gating what comes in and goes out of the building. This also extends to like who are the employees, how are the applications talking to other applications or data centers within these four walls. The networks were really kind of trusted. The databases could really kind of interconnect with these. But what happens really when like this kind of the infrastructure and applications start to leave these four walls and go into this kind of hybrid or even cloud world? So when we kind of look at from this kind of digital transformation, it's really the idea that like the shift from kind of a static world or really kind of dedicated infrastructure into more a like private cloud, hybrid cloud, multiple clouds, and kind of the systems of record that need to engage with the systems of engagement start to shift. When we talk about the traditional data center, everything was more or less static or kind of defined. So networks and firewalls, security was based around IP, HSMs and SIMs. Then also you could kind of control and restrict access to like the physical premises as well. This all starts to kind of fade away in this dynamic environment where really the idea is you have dynamic access and networking, identity-based security, and then software-defined access and controls. So when we look at this kind of concept of multi-cloud security in the Zero Trust world, there are really kind of four primitives that we align on. And these are really kind of driven by this idea of identity-driven controls. So machine authentication and authorization, machine-to-machine access, and then human-to-machine access, and then human authentication and authorization. And this is really kind of all around the idea of the concept of trust nothing and authenticate and authorize everything. You'll often hear the term Zero Trust kind of maybe throw around in specific verticals or industries, but really the concept here is taking a Zero Trust approach really kind of lands on the idea that you really want to trust nothing in the world. Build towards the idea that you want to authenticate and authorize everything. And we'll kind of step through some of these kind of different primitives. So we'll start here with machine authentication and authorization. In 2015, we introduced the world to HashiCorp Vault, and this was really around the idea of enabling developers and companies to kind of securely store and tightly control access to really any kind of secrets in their world. And it's really started to kind of evolve, but we want to kind of touch kind of basically on the approach of Vault, which is the idea that Vault really kind of everything that you do within Vault has to have authentication and authorization tied to it. So anything, any secret that you're trying to get access to, any data that you're trying to either encrypt or decrypt, everything has to go through the same workflow, which is you're going to have to authenticate based on this trusted form of identity, where you can support or integrate these different kind of platforms and whatnot. And we can talk about that a little bit later. as well as then anything that you're going to try to access within Vault has to be authorized. And this is driven by policies as well as other kind of like formatting in terms of tokens and whatnot, as well as being able to access it. So when we talk about Vault, really, it's this kind of foundational layer of identity-based security around secrets management, data encryption, as well as some advanced workloads in terms of like data protection with like data masking, format preserving encryption, and so on. We've seen a lot of success with the open source and enterprise products. In 2020, we saw over 15 million downloads, which is an incredible number for us, and it's grown significantly over the years. So we're really excited about the growth of the product as well. And the product is really kind of driven and based in this idea of identity brokering. So the idea being that anything that you want to do within Vault can really be leveraging your multiple kind of forms of identity across clouds, across your different work streams and workflows. So that really, if you're trying to integrate within an application within, let's say, AWS, in your data source within Azure, or maybe even on-prem, that you can connect these all within logical forms of identity within the system, and then execute your kind of operational workload against all those. And we also, earlier this year, kind of rolled out the public beta for HCP Vault, which is also going to be public here fairly soon. With HCP Vault, we also kind of take this idea of Vault bringing into the cloud for day zero readiness. So the idea of modern cloud security to quickly secure applications access from a kind of a day zero standpoint. Reliability as well. So we have hundreds of thousands of hours supporting customers in Vault. And so really kind of this brings that expertise to you. And then we also try to, or the product is aimed around kind of reducing the complexity and overhead around standing up Vault and managing it. So it's around the idea of how can we simply get the output of Vault, so you're really kind of getting all the power and security of Vault without the complexity and overhead of managing it yourself. So the idea here is that like you're getting that machine authentication and authorization with really kind of like you can kind of stand it up quickly and have that kind of as a day zero. So when we talk about machine-to-machine access, this is kind of building upon that story of when you have applications or services that need to connect to each other, how do you securely make sure that the right services are being able to access other services or other sources of truth? And so we have HashiCorp Console, or Consul really is around the idea of how do you kind of connect these different services securely across your different environments and your different infrastructure. And Consul is really kind of based around these kind of three workloads around service discovery and health monitoring. So how do you bring up like a real-time look at locations of services, how they're connecting to each other. The idea of multi-platform service mesh. So how do you connect these services securely over these different environments through, again, this kind of mutual TLS and this kind of trusted form of communication, as well as network infrastructure automation. So accelerating this kind of idea of managing and automating your network infrastructure. And Consul is really kind of driven around this idea of kind of a shared registry and also authentication. So like your, the applications or your services also have this kind of identity-based security so that you can authenticate that these services can talk to one another. You can discover these and bring these in automated to where you're kind of removing the complexity from manually automating or managing all of these. And then we've also seen, we're seeing over 1 million downloads a month for Consul again. So the scale that we're starting to see for this is pretty incredible. And again, the guiding principle really here is around the idea of application-based networking. And this is all based on, again, kind of tying this into the security of the identity. And so that you're securing this kind of access based on these kind of trusted forms of identity. And then we also rolled out earlier this year in February, we did the public availability for HCP Console as well. So we're really excited about that. So then we kind of shift over into like the human user side of the kind of piece here, which is we've talked about how machine authentication authorization and how those like machine-to-machine access needs to happen in order to kind of have this zero trust world. So next, really, in the identity-driven controls is the idea of there are going to be users, human kind of users that need to access these different endpoints, that need to access infrastructure application. So really, we start to talk about how do those people then authenticate and authorize to what they can access. And this has really kind of evolved over the last, several years, whereas the traditional sense, it was, potentially just username, password in this kind of static form of authentication. And this has started to evolve really when it started going to private data center or single sign-on, to where Active Directory started coming into play, and so was their LDAP. And this has really started to grow and evolve into where it is today, which is where you have more of like the cloud single sign-ons, where you have the Oktas, the ping, the ADFSs. And so really the concept here is having that source of truth aligned with your kind of like identity system. And so really at HashiCorp, we really kind of fundamentally look at how do we bring that in and leverage and broker those kind of those identity-driven controls to what people can access, what are the policies just to align with that. So when we talk about human-to-machine access, this is where it becomes a little bit different, especially in the last, over the last couple of years, or the last couple of months, I should say, with the expansion of remote workforce and the amount of people that are starting to have to get access to different systems that maybe they didn't even 12 months ago. So on the human-machine access side, we introduced HashiCorp Boundary in October of last year, and it was really around the idea of simple and secure remote access. So when we talk about like the traditional workflow for access, it's really aligned around this idea of, a user would then have to request access to get to, let's say, an application or a data source. So then they would have to get issued VPN credentials or SSH keys. They then are given access to the network, potentially different IP addresses and addresses to access these different resources. They then have to go through the firewall, which then puts them on kind of the network, and they can potentially access different resources or endpoints. And then at the end of that, they also need then the credentials to actually access the resources. Onboarding this is really difficult. So when you're bringing like new people on, or even offboarding people, so people that might be leaving the companies, how do you control who has access to these different these credentials, these addresses? You're also exposing your entire network potentially to that user. So whatever else is potentially on the network, they can have access to those kind of different resources. Scaling this across your different environments can become incredibly brittle when you're talking about static IP addresses or managing IP addresses to these different resources. And then you're also exposing the credentials out to these people. So you're giving them a username and a password to access your resource on VPN X and whatnot. So in the dynamic workflow for access, when we talk about this shift from static to dynamic, it really starts to align around that the user should theoretically be able to log in with their trusted form of identity. They're then authenticated and authorized based on roles and services of what they can have access to. They could then select their host or service securely and then connect automatically. What this does is this makes onboarding really easy. So as your workforce grows, or again, you're maybe even having people that leave that you need to manage, or control the access. What this does is it allows you to control and scale this up, so you can do this based on large user groups or policy groups. And then your configuration is stable. So you're basing this again on these kind of trusted systems of truth. Your network in this scenario is remaining private, so you're not exposing additional information that could be expanding your attack surface. And then you're also not exposing your credentials. And so when we talk about the way that HashiCorp is kind of, or Boundary specifically is solving this problem, it's really the idea that the workflow here is that someone would come in, they would authenticate within their, their system of truth, so their identity provider here. They would then kind of work through what they're authorized to access. and then they would just connect automatically to whatever the endpoint is that they're trying to connect to. And really the goals around Boundary are set up around the concept of on-demand access, especially working through dynamic environments, and easy to use, and again, open source throughout all of this. So then when we look at this kind of from the lens of this multi-cloud security world, it really kind of ties together this story of how do you secure all of your infrastructure across, your on-premises, your clouds, your hybrid environments, your service or interconnectivity, whether it's applications or machine-to-machine access or microservices, or people that are trying to get access to the systems and resources they need. And this is really kind of how we view this world within the kind of the zero trust world.
Can you talk a little bit about the machine-to-machine in terms of what's happening in terms of IoT, where we see an explosion of devices and machines, and how this model might change, or how the application-based networking fits into that IoT world?
Yeah, for sure. So the IoT kind of use case for us is something that we're also seeing like a pretty large growth in it, where a lot of companies and users are trying to bring technology to the edge. So it could be like retail organizations or even just handheld devices, things like that. Part of why throughout our company, not just specifically, maybe individual products, but part of why we look at securing these things with identity is that it makes the process of issuance and managing these things across all these, n number of devices a lot easier, because you're starting to set up these kind of global, one-to-many policies around what devices can access what. When you start to kind of decompose that into like the actual services of these things, that's where you start to attach, within like, let's say the Consul story of the service mesh or the service-to-service security or connectivity, is that each of these services can have either a very specific policy that allows service 1 to connect to service 2. You could also set up these global policies where any of the services that align with service 1, so if there's 500 versions of service 1, they all still get treated the same way, but they actually get authenticated based on their own kind of profile. So like, let's say within like a TLS certificate that gets issued to them. So then the system, so in this particular setup, Consul or even Vault could then authenticate those services against everything. So again, you're automating this one-to-many scale of how does a service or how do my services connect? So when you start to look at like, how do you map this out across a geo or even the world, that everything can have its own place. And this is also the case with the machine-to-machine authentication and authorization side of the house, is everything can start to have its own. Again, you could have work groups, you could have individual policies. So the granularity is really kind of set up for you, so that you can have these global policies all the way down as granular as you need.
So, for example, if I had some IoT devices which were a significant business benefit, but had perhaps not the best security mechanisms, by grouping them in this way and restricting their access, this would be a significant advantage of using this kind of platform. Would be, I could kind of group them and manage them even if they're distributed right across the world. Is that
that's
kind
correct.
of thing you're saying?
Yeah. So part of it is that with the mutual TLS and the certificate connectivity between them, is that the whole time you're able to verify. So through the authentication authorization, you can verify that it is what it says it is, so that the policy or whatever that service, let's say, is allowed to do is actually attached to something. And that is always going to be like within, like, let's say the different products here, the idea is that you authenticate and authorize every action. So it's not like you're issuing something and then it gets access for 3 months or 180 days. You want it to have it to where it's constant, so that nothing can be spoofed, nothing can be stolen in that kind of context.
I have a question regarding the Vault. What level of FIPS certification do you have for the for the Vault?
Yeah, so we're currently 140-2, and we can also take this, I think, at a later session if we wanted to dive deeper into this. But we do have different kind of certifications depending on what you're looking at. And if someone wants to take it, I think Andy, I see you unmuting, so if you want to take it too.
Sure. Hey, my name is Andy Minoski. I'm the Principal Product Manager for Cryptography and Security Products here at HashiCorp. HashiCorp Vault, as well as the other products here at HashiCorp, do not have a native FIPS certification yet, so we don't have a CMVP number yet. We are currently in the process of developing and evaluating a version of Vault Enterprise that will have a native FIPS certification and a CMVP letter with it. So how you would normally achieve conformance with FIPS today with products like Vault is you would use a feature known as Seal Wrap in Vault Enterprise that allows you to be able to envelope and protect all of the critical security parameters, or CSPs, that protect key storage and key transport requirements for FIPS 140-2 and 140-3. What's really good about this feature actually is that by leveraging Seal Wrap, you can actually point to a cryptographic module that is FIPS certified that has a level of like level 1 through X, and pursuant to our external audit, you can actually maintain the FIPS certification level of that. So if you have a FIPS 140-2 level 3, for example, crypto module, which has tamper resistance and tamper evidence and lots of other hardware focused features, this allows you the capability to carry those protections through to how Vault handles storage and transport of all the secrets.
And to reach it, regarding the HSM integration, are you open to work with different vendors, or how is this working from a software perspective and compatibility perspective?
Fantastic question. So with when it comes to operating with HSMs, the operation in Vault with HSMs uses the PKCS11 protocol. So it's actually not vendor specific as long as you support a version of PKCS11 that came out in the mid 2000s or more recent. We will work with that vendor to be able to not only enable Vault to be auto unsealed with whatever is the mechanism for that HSM, but features like Seal Wrap or the ability to use entropy augmentation, which has actually been enhanced in the most recent version of Vault that released earlier today. You can enable these features as well to take advantage of the hardware, random number generators, and other cryptographic modules within that HSM, regardless of whatever the vendor is.
Okay, and because you mentioned the wrap key, which is, let's say more or less the industry standard, yeah. Microsoft has done recently something which they called they have a new option beside the wrap key for the Azure Key Vault, which is double key encryption. Have you support for that as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So there's different ways that we support things like Azure Key Vault's mechanisms with like auto unseal versus how we would interact with being able to resource things using the new key management secret engine with that surface. So in one manner, yes, we do. And the other, we have features to kind of turn it on and turn it off, but it's not by default. So this is actually one of the best parts about Vault, is that Vault has a number of capabilities for interacting with your cloud infrastructure, regardless of whatever vendor it is. But we interact with it in different ways. So we kind of recommend you take a look at our documentation around specifically that functionality and how it relates to the different areas of Vault.
Yeah, I guess this is a typical key answer. Also, if you look at any of the cloud vendors, you have to look for every specific feature which is from a compatibility level. I can understand that there is no general, let's say, answer to that. Yeah, thanks.